What if one day you wake up and you simply can't go on living life the way you have been? You cannot keep pretending that the life you're living fits you. You lose tolerance for your job, maybe some relationships, some dynamics, and the identity that you almost convinced yourself was actually you, that you've carried around for all these years. That facade of who you thought you were starts to crack, starts to fade away. What if I tell you that that's how spiritual awakenings begin? Awakenings aren't beautiful at first. They're really disruptive. They force you to tear down what's fake so that you can rebuild what's real or remember what's real. And if you're listening to this and you're like, damn man, this doesn't sound spiritual, this sounds dark as shit, just know that sometimes when you reach a certain point in your life where it feels like almost like you've hit a rock bottom, it feels like your life might be falling apart, but your life might just be falling together. This is your roadmap to identifying and navigating your own spiritual awakening. What if one day you wake up and you simply can't go on living life the way you have been? You cannot keep pretending that the life you're living fits you. You lose tolerance for your job, maybe some relationships, some dynamics, and the identity that you almost convinced yourself was actually you, that you've carried around for all these years. That facade of who you thought you were starts to crack, starts to fade away. What if I tell you that that's how spiritual awakenings begin? And you might be asking, where's the spiritual part in all that? Awakenings aren't beautiful at first. They're really disruptive. They force you to tear down what's fake so that you can rebuild what's real or remember what's real. When you peel back those onion layers, both learning and unlearning some things, and integrate into your most authentic self, your life will become more full than you ever could imagine. And it doesn't mean that life won't still be hard sometimes, but you'll have the tools, the resources. You'll remember how to step back into your authenticity and step back into the things that you're really most interested in doing in life. There are certainly still some hard right or left turns that you could take that may not be very positive for you, and some common pitfalls that a lot of people end up in. And we're going to talk about those too. But just know that sometimes when you reach a certain point in your life where it feels like almost like you've hit a rock bottom, it feels like your life might be falling apart, but your life might just be falling together. This is your roadmap to identifying and navigating your own spiritual awakening. So maybe when you hear the term spiritual awakening, you think like the crystal girl who's sitting there and she's really woo and she's weird and she's got a lot of wacky friends. That might be a little bit of a part of it for you, but it doesn't have to be any of those things. Spiritual awakening is really what's happening inside of you and your ability to understand what's really important to you and your ability to relate to others in a way that is more whole and less separate. Spiritual awakening is really just a profound internal shift that helps you realize that the life you've been living is out of alignment with who you really are. It's not just about raising your vibration. It's about truth, clarity, identity, and dismantling and unlearning the things that don't serve you. Some signs that you might be entering this phase of your life is if you are increasingly uncomfortable with old patterns that you know deep down don't serve you. You have a sudden clarity about what's fake, unhealthy, or draining to you. You probably feel pulled towards something more, even if you don't know what that something more is yet. And then there's a lack of tolerance. Things that you used to tolerate in your life, particularly in your relationships, bad dynamics, things like that, they become unbearable. And then there's this overall sense that you're shedding your identity or some part of it. Maybe your job feels suffocating. Maybe it's meaningless. Maybe you feel like the work you don't do is actually ethical out there in the world. Maybe you just don't feel like you can do it forever and you don't really know what you want even, but you know it's not this. Going to all the same places, being in the same routines, spending time with people and doing things that don't really serve you or carry you forward in life. Going through the motions becomes impossible. Small talk, dead forever. You're not interested in it. I'm not interested. Why are we doing it? Surface level relationships, conversations, no longer appealing to you. You want more. Not having something you love as either your job or your hobby, that becomes a problem. And doing what society and consumerism expects you to do instead of doing what you really would like to be doing with your time. And there's a deep sense of just a feeling that you can't pretend about things anymore. You can't pretend long enough to have a really fake conversation with an acquaintance. You can't bring yourself to do things that don't align with you. Even if you feel like you don't really know who you are right now, you just know that like what you've been doing isn't it. And in your relationships, you naturally drift from people who don't support your growth, who never really encourage you, always have something negative to say when you have positive news. They're always trying to dark cloud your moment, bring you down, not really encourage you or support your efforts to do better. You tend to outgrow those relationships that are based on all the wrong things. They're based on trauma bonding, caretaking, or survival, like those survival patterns. This most often shows up in immediate family or with partners. It's really hard to stick around at this point for people who have no intention of doing work on themselves, either to help themselves or to be a better person for the people around them. Those are the folks that it always feels like they're trying to drag you back into those unhealthy patterns that maybe you grew up with or maybe you ended up in for some number of years, but it's just not you anymore. And you're not going to put up with that because those are the same patterns that you're trying to heal from. It's okay to distance yourself from relationships where they're not safe for you, you're not respected, or they don't foster your growth. You're going to find that your tolerance for disrespect, inconsistency, for unhealthy dynamics, emotional immaturity, you're going to find that your tolerance for those things drops significantly. And that's normal. You're not becoming a cold person. You're becoming aligned with who you are. And sometimes not everybody gets to hop on that train with you. And that's probably one of the deepest, darkest parts of this, but it is a real part of this. And it's something that you just need to be aware of. Those feelings that you're feeling, they're not unnatural. They're a natural part of becoming better. And it doesn't mean that you can't still have some people in your life, but there are some people that you might have to distance yourselves from, and that's okay. Then when it comes to your career, you might be tempted to quit your job tomorrow because you've just reached a threshold where you're not willing to do a job that you don't see any purpose in or you don't feel valued or it doesn't even provide what you need to get by. You lose motivation for those roles that really drain you. And you feel a pull towards purpose, towards creativity, authenticity, or service of others. That's a big theme of those who are reaching this stage in their life where they're really going through an awakening. They tend to be more inclined towards wanting to find a way to serve others in their role in society, in their career, in their job. We were meant to create things, to learn, to create meaning for ourselves and for the people we love, instead of being basically indentured servants at this point. You are just waking up to that fact. And you're also maybe realizing that even if you don't know how to take the next steps yet, that there are so many different ways to create something, to express yourself and your talents and your passions, and maybe even make a living from it. Maybe your awakening is actually less about your job and more about the fact that you've made your job so much of your identity and your life that you never really stopped to ask who you are outside of that job. Maybe you never really found any passions or hobbies and interests that you could take on outside of there to give you more fulfillment, because you have to realize that job, whatever it may be, is probably not going to last forever, whether AI takes your job or you just lose it somehow, or something happens in your life and things change, or just naturally you get older, it's time to retire, it's time to think about the next chapter. Some people get to that point in their life and they haven't thought about, what is my next chapter? Who am I without this role, without this career? It's something to think about. I personally got to a point in my life where I had had a couple of pretty bad employment experiences, and coinciding with all of the stuff that was going on in my personal life, I was like, I am not cut out for this. I know I can do great things, but I don't think I'm going to do them here. It's okay to have those realizations in life. I found that if I like what I'm doing, if I feel like I'm getting paid an amount that makes sense for me and I can support myself doing it, I'm much more happy to get out of work and be a self-starter and go after what I want. And it doesn't mean that that's what you have to do with your life. You can always work for someone else, but in a way that brings you joy and doesn't make you dread your alarm clock going off every single morning. In general, the big overarching theme is rejection of anything that requires you to compromise on your values, on your integrity, of your authenticity, of who you are. Anything that causes you to compromise those things, to put them on the back burner, it's not going to align with you anymore. You have to know that. As more time goes on, it's going to be more and more uncomfortable if you are continuing to not listen to your heart and force yourself into relationships, situations, workplaces, whatever, that don't align with you. You're going to stop performing for others. You're going to stop masking. You're going to stop, you're going to refuse to be someone that others expect you to be. You're going to want to be more yourself. Those boundaries, going to come up pretty fast. You have to learn to use them. That's part of survival, and that's part of getting through this stage of your life where it's time to make big changes. And slowly, that internal voice of truth that that is within you, that becomes louder than all external pressures. Hey there, what's up? My name's Ashley. I'm a life coach, and I help people going through the spiritual awakening that we're talking about right now. I also help people going through burnout, big life changes, and I also help people who are ADHD and on the spectrum find their purpose, find their flow, and in general, for everyone, build a life that aligns with you. So if any of that sounds like you, you're in the right place. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. There's tons of content I put out that's just for you. Spiritual awakenings often come during really stressful periods in life. This is usually the breaking point that you hit. Often it's burnout, either a career or lifestyle, job loss, health scares, health issues in general, just hitting an emotional rock bottom, an identity collapse, just feeling directionless, kind of lost, without purpose. A big breakup, especially if it is one person escaping out from under somebody who is narcissistic or sociopathic, somebody who's abusive, or a deep, deep heartbreak. Leaving those types of relationship dynamics or having that deep heartbreak, they can really be a Kickstarter to, really going through it and reevaluating who you are. In part because when you're in a relationship, your identity, even though you have separate identities, as you should, your identity becomes a little bit attached to another person. And, separating that out, especially if it's a very unhealthy dynamic where your identity was not very present, you're stuck wondering what your identity really is. And that's a big thing. I've gotten to a point with people in my life that were frankly narcissistic and very, very toxic to be around. And you get to a certain point in your life where you have enough of your own stuff going on, and you come to realize that maybe this person, whoever is in your life, that it's a really unhealthy dynamic, that they might be projecting all of their stuff that has nothing to do with you onto you. And you can only accept that for so long before, it's either going to kill you or it's going to set you free, because you just realize that life is more than accepting this treatment. And I've been in a position where I had to, leave where I was living and go live with someone else who I barely knew. And my God, I think I felt more acceptance in that than I felt, with somebody I knew my whole life. It's really scary when you have to make big changes when you're going through this period of your life. But when you know that what is going on isn't working, You have to be willing to take the risk at some point because you already know it sucks now. You think it's going to suck less a few years from now? Come on, you know it's probably not, especially when it comes to relationships and relationship dynamics. If the other party is not a party who has any intention of changing anything, of improving, or of hearing you, of listening, what can you offer? What can you provide that's going to change that? Nothing really. So, it's really up to you to make the changes that you need to be safe, to be healthy, to have clear mental health and not feel like you can't make it or you can't do anything right or whatever the case may be. And there's a certain point, the awakening point, I think, is really when deep down some part of you just says, let it fall apart. Just let it fall apart. Like I said, you know that what you've been doing in whatever, category of your life, whatever you've been doing, it isn't working. And you may not know what your next steps are, like I said, but you know that whatever this is, isn't it? And if you're listening to this and you're like, damn, man, this doesn't sound spiritual. This sounds dark as shit. Well, it is a little dark. But like I said, that darkness is part of really shedding away those layers and understanding who you are. And it's not for the faint of heart, but it happens to many people. And many people don't know what it is. And if they're not in therapy or if they're not watching this video or some other video like it, they're not going to really understand what to do. And people can get a little lost. And during this period, there's a certain point where you say, okay, I know all of those things aren't working. And I know I need to fix a lot of things, but who even am I? Or maybe you've started to fix a lot of things, but you still get to this point of, who am I? Your identity, your purpose, what life means to you. You can really feel numb and disconnected, kind of dissociated from yourself. You can have a loss of faith in your own goals or a literal loss of faith religiously. Anything that doesn't feel authentic to you anymore. You may not know who you are sometimes, but you know it's not who you used to be. You're just in that in-between phase. These dark reflections on who we are and what we desire, they're difficult, but they're really sometimes needed to figure out what isn't working and shed it away. And that helps you move forward into a new chapter in your life. Because this time is rather dark for a lot of people, this is when a lot of people do turn to spirituality and they do realize some very important things. They do realize that all souls they're individuals, but we are all also a collective. And sometimes people have really deep, profound realizations, whether they're meditating and trying to get better and they kind of slip into an altered state and discover the secrets of the universe, or just something really dark is going on in their life and they kind of have this realization. As beautiful and as reassuring as those realizations are about the universe, they are also very overwhelming. That we are all one and we are very connected, even if we feel very opposed to each other. Right now, politics is a mess, right? We feel so opposed to each other, but the ugliness in other people is actually the ugliness in us. We all have some ugliness in us. And, coming to a point where you understand that, even if you don't know what to do with it yet, it is both wonderful and overwhelming. Like I said, it takes time to integrate those understandings, not just into your psyche, but actually applying them to your life and your interactions with people day to day. And once we're at that stage, we have to figure out what it's time to unlearn. And this can often be the most painful part of doing better. Trying to get rid of people pleasing and other old survival patterns of yours that they aren't aligned with who you are and who you're trying to be. Generational conditioning. Some people have grown up with, the patterns of maybe abuse or just the family dynamics that have been passed down from great grandparent to grandparent to parent, and now you're here, the millennial or the Gen Zer or whoever, trying to break that pattern, trying to do better for yourself and for your kids, maybe. It's a blessing to reach this point in your life, even when it's dark, because you have the opportunity to be the person in your bloodline who kills the generational curse, who raises their kids in an environment that fosters love and kindness and creativity and not fear and lies and abuse. Just an example. You have to unlearn the identity that you were probably praised for, but that also at the same time pulled you out of alignment with who you are. In essence, trying to be popular, trying to be cool. It works when you're in school to help you survive, but in adulthood, it really doesn't help you because you realize that none of your relationships or, friendships are built on authenticity, and that's not going to make you happy. I'm sorry. And in general, those beliefs and habits that made you feel safe but kept you small. Maybe you depend too much on substances to get through social interactions or to function. The beliefs about yourself, your self limiting beliefs, all of those things that you were taught either because you were taught you weren't enough or that you would never be enough or that you were just a pain in the ass and always in someone's way as a kid, it makes you learn how to be small and invisible and not express yourself and to be seen and to step into your authenticity, to step into a career or a life that is more suited to you and aligned with you. In order to do that, you need to be more comfortable being seen. And that's a very difficult thing to unlearn. And something that I personally have struggled with in my life is being more comfortable being seen. Not just here on this camera, but in my relationships or in a room full of friends. So what do you do when you realize that you are in some stage of awakening? As I said before, it's not just about raising your vibration. While that is a wonderful thing to try to do, it's not just about that. In fact, having your head stuck in the clouds can actually wreak havoc in your life. By that I mean, once you discover that there's more out there to your consciousness, to your life, you can become like a whimsical person that just is, flying around by the seat of their pants, and you can get sucked into believing that the universe is always going to protect you, even if you do something incredibly deadly, dangerous, stupid. Don't delude yourself. It can easily happen that if you take on too much too fast when it comes to especially exploring your consciousness and altered states of consciousness, you can get overwhelmed. And if you don't understand what you're doing a little bit, and if you don't have some baseline layers of protection on yourself, you can fracture your mind. Awakening is not for the weak, okay? Spiritual psychosis is real. Now, I do want to say that a lot of people tend to throw the term spiritual psychosis around unfairly, and I think that that is incredibly damaging. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people tend to stereotype and see like the crystal girl who's meditating and talking about whatever other dimensions or other beings or you know crystals and angel numbers or whatever. I get it. It's a lot. Maybe you don't understand that stuff. But to flat out say that that person is crazy, that they're just, going through spiritual psychosis, that's rather dismissive. And most people don't say that about people who are in church saying that they talk to God. It's all the same thing, you guys. Meditating and praying, it's all the same thing. And yeah, when you meditate and when you pray, sometimes you're interacting with something and you don't really know what it is. And sometimes that can be positive and sometimes that can be not so positive. And there are ways to protect yourself and things you need to understand before you just go diving headfirst into that world. It's important to take a little bit at a time and, one shift at a time, one insight at a time, layering one new habit at a time on top of another. Take it step by step. Trying to like ascend your whole life in 1 week is just not something that you want to be doing. That can become escapism. It can become psychosis, like I said. Learning to have discernment when you are interacting with altered states of consciousness and maybe quantum realms is something that is learned, and you don't learn it overnight. So, again, baby steps, people. Baby steps. You can pick that up a month from now, or a year from now, a few weeks from now, whatever, and it will still be just as valid, and you can still learn just as much. But trying to hammer it away like you're studying for a test isn't really the way to go about this. This is your life. This is your mental health. It's you exploring a very big, big universe out there, all by yourself with your little tiny human brain. So it's a lot of information for us to take in, folks. And I understand that it's exciting when we find out that there's a lot more to the universe than maybe what we see with our eyes every day. But don't overdo it. It does come to you naturally. You just have to keep working on your actual physical 3D reality. You still have to continue building good routines and keep your body taken care of and handle your bills, your responsibilities, be present in your relationships. You still need real world connections and actual physical change. Awakening without practical action is really just fantasy. And likewise, practical action without awakening is probably stagnation. The magic is in balancing both. Likewise, awakening without developing discernment is a recipe for disaster. So plug away at this bit by bit, manageable bite after another. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you realize that you've done a little too much too soon, or you just feel like you're downloading a lot of information about yourself, the universe, whatever, get out in nature, get your feet on the ground, do some breath work, take a bath, take a break, do something else for a while. You should journal your experiences, though. I find it's incredibly important to help you remember them, because I think I'm going to remember all these things, and then sometimes I re-remember things and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot all about it. I had that crazy experience or this past lifetime regression that I totally forgot about. Whatever. It happens sometimes just when you're meditating or something. Write them down after. It's always nice to go back and remember them, and to also understand how far you've come and how your meditation skills and whatever else you're working on to whatever your healing tools are, so to speak, how they're developing. This is a time in your life when isolation is very real, and frankly, maybe a lot of people in your life probably don't understand what you're going through, and they can't because they haven't been there. So be kind to them, but and maybe don't overload them with information from a quantum realm, but do align yourself with community who do understand. Spiritual talk on TikTok is usually pretty good for that. Maybe people around you in your life that know a little more about this stuff or really been through it, they might just understand a little better. If you're going through an awakening right now, what's the biggest shift that you're noticing for you? Let me know in the comments. So if you're going through that major life stressor, if you've realized that the way you've been living in whatever manner just isn't working anymore, and you're in a pretty dark place trying to figure it out, take it day by day. Know that this is part of the process. Sometimes it is not everything falling apart. It is actually everything falling together. And you might have to get beat over the head with a few hard lessons before you fully understand them. You might have to make a few missteps and be like, oh, I did that once before, not doing that again, it's okay. You're learning. And when certain opportunities, the door closes, others do open. And I know it never feels like that when the shit hits the fan in the moment in your life, but that is true. You don't need to figure out what your life's purpose is on day one of realizing that life as is not working. You just need a today plan, not a 10-year plan. Consistency is more important than intensity here, and really just taking the next authentic step for you is the best thing to do. Remember, a spiritual awakening isn't about becoming a new person. It's about relearning who you were before the world taught you to be someone else. It's about what this life really means to you, and how you want to spend your time here. And it's not so much about fixing yourself as it is about reconnecting with your truth.